Today we're going to be discussing local history preservation, in particular with the focus on the importance of this at the local level, in particular rural locations. Historic preservation in general has a significance of helping retain a sense of context and character for a specific place. It can also provide a deeper cultural understanding, the roots, so to speak, of a region. This becomes crucial for local areas, especially those in the smaller, more rural setting. Oftentimes, these places retain a lot of significant history. However, it takes the vested interest of local historical societies or specific individuals to work to preserve the integrity of those specific buildings, places, battlefields, etc. And without these types of efforts, a lot of this local history can be lost. And I think that a great way to understand this is to look at a specific example. In Dalton, Georgia, where I'm currently located, which is in northwest Georgia, there is a smaller town. It has grown in the last few years of Dalton, Georgia. Historically speaking, though, it has been relatively rural and pretty small. And within the city, there is a house called the Blunt House that was built in 1848. And on the surface, this particular home would not hold potentially a lot of historical value, maybe in the New England region or places that were settled at an extensively earlier time. However, for this particular city, this is the second oldest establishment that's still standing. The house was built by Mayor and Postmaster Ainsworth Blunt. The man himself has a pretty interesting story. Outside of the home, he originally relocated to Dalton, Georgia as a missionary to work and convert local indigenous people. In particular, he would take an interest with the Cherokee people, and Blunt was so passionate about this type of outreach that he would actually travel with the Cherokee once Indian removal was effected and the Trail of Tears organized along the Trail of Tears. However, Blunt would return to his house, and during the Civil War is perhaps when the Blunt House takes its most impactful place in history. Initially, the house would serve as a host home for Confederate General Joseph E. Johnston and his troops. They would be entertained there, reside there, eat there. However, in about 1863, the region would fall, East Tennessee, Northwest Georgia, into the hands of Union control. Dalton would serve as the initial launch point for William T. Sherman's campaign through Georgia. And while fighting in the region, the home would actually be converted into a Union hospital. Once the region was secured and Sherman vacated, the house would actually not be burned. There are several reasons that are cited for this. The first, I think, could be the most obvious, and the fact that the home served as a Union hospital. However, though, there's narratives that also allude to the fact that the Blunts were actually Union sympathizers, and so that the house was preserved kind of on a twofold fashion. On one hand, because it did serve as a Union hospital, then on the other, in that the Blunt family was actually Union loyalist. However, at any rate, the house did survive the war, and once the war was over, the Blunt family would return from Indiana and resume living in the home. Shortly after returning, though, Ainsworth would pass, and he would leave the home to his daughters and his wife. Over the next several decades, the home would change its shape. His oldest daughter, Lily, would expand the house. The original home was 4 bedrooms. She would add additions to this to make the house larger. Also, there would be some modernizing features at the turn of the century to make living more comfortable. Interestingly, this house would be the home to Blunt family relatives all the way until 1976. The last living relative of the Blunt family would pass then, and the home would be left to the Whitfield County Historical Society. This was incredibly thoughtful, in that it ensured that the Blunt home would continue. Without this decision, it's difficult to say that the home would have been able to retain its historical value. Most likely someone would have renovated it, modernized the home, losing a large part of its historical value. At any rate, the house would be placed on the National Historic Places list in 1981, which was significant. This registry is vital, especially in the local history setting, for providing funding and protection for a lot of these sites. And once achieving the status and additional funding, the house would begin the process of preservation and restoration. This process can be very extensive for sites. And in fact, with this particular home, some of the more challenging aspects were tied to replacing the rotten siding. The wood siding that was used on the home originally had different dimensions and sizing than you see with modern wood siding panels. And so it would require special lumber, special custom sizing in order to replace it. Interestingly, there are several different steps or phases that local historic preservation can fall into. Preservation itself means that you're going to preserve the home for future generations. You're going to go through processes that ensure that the building itself is able to continue to stand and be seen. Restoration is, of course, restoring elements to their original historical value within the best of your ability. However, there are a few others that did not fit within the Blunt home, like, for example, rehabilitation. Because the Blunt family had lived in the house for so long and it was so functional, there was not extensive damage. Rehabilitation processes often occur when the site has been degraded to a point that major renovation is necessary. Often you see this in local settings, adaptive reuse. Another site within Dalton, Georgia has seen this. There was some old textile mills that have been converted into current apartment buildings. The site itself was renovated and it's preserved. However, the original function is not the purpose. It's no longer the site of an industrial textile mill. However, it has been restored. The building's been restored, retains lots of its old value, but it's used for apartment style housing. And then the last two that often can occur within preservation processes would be something called mothballing, which allows for a site to be preserved, to be saved. However, the actual action of restoring the said site does not occur yet. Essentially, the site is tabled and you're preventing further damage from occurring. However, the actual restoration process is yet to be seen. And then lastly, moving. This would be the less ideal situation. However, though, there are situations where historical sites, historical buildings are in a location that they cannot stay in, whether it's through damage or contractual building, any sort of those circumstances, and you actually have to try to physically move the history from one location to another. Obviously, this is a large undertaking and would require special circumstances. However, it is something that has occurred and will continue to occur as we continue, to build and live in certain regions where there's vital history. As you can see, there's several different processes that can go with local history preservation. However, the importance of this, as evidenced with the Blunt House, I think at the local level cannot be overlooked. In most cases, these types of buildings and sites may not hold major national value, but for example, the structure of the Blunt House retains a lot of local history for Dalton, Georgia. The house has survived centuries and has held many descendants of the Blunt family and seen many changes that the city has gone through. That fortunately, in this setting, in this case, the home was not lost, but local preservation is something that hopefully will continue at a larger rate, larger effort. Thank you.